The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the dusty town of Silver Creek, Montana Territory, and Catherine Morris stepped down onto the wooden boardwalk with nothing but the worn dress on her back and a heart full of shattered dreams. It was August 1878, and the summer sun beat down mercilessly on the small frontier town, turning the dirt streets into ribbons of pale dust that clung to everything it touched. Catherine's hands trembled as she clutched the single carpetbag that contained all her worldly possessions, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar street with a mixture of fear and desperate determination. She had nowhere to go, no money to her name, and the bitter taste of betrayal still fresh on her tongue. 3 weeks ago, her husband Thomas had walked out of their home in Kansas City with every dollar they possessed, leaving behind only a brief note that said he was heading west to seek his fortune and that she should not follow. The landlord had given her 2 days to vacate, and when she had gone to the bank, she discovered that Thomas had emptied their savings account entirely. 26 years old and suddenly destitute, Catherine had sold the few items of value she owned to purchase a ticket west, clinging to the slim hope that she might find work in one of the growing frontier towns where women were scarce and opportunities might exist for someone willing to work hard. Silver Creek was smaller than she had imagined, consisting of perhaps 24 buildings clustered along a single main street, with the wild Montana mountains rising in the distance like ancient guardians. The town had sprung up around a silver mine that had proven moderately successful, drawing miners, merchants, and those who serviced them all. Catherine could see the general store, a saloon with weathered swinging doors, a building that proclaimed itself to be the assayer's office, and at the far end of the street, a small church with a white steeple that seemed almost defiant in its cleanliness against the dust-covered surroundings. She took a deep breath and started walking toward the general store, hoping they might know of someone who needed help, perhaps as a cook or a seamstress. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had eaten nothing since yesterday morning, but the few coins in her pocket needed to last until she found employment. As she passed the saloon, several men loitering outside turned to stare at her, their eyes bold and appraising in a way that made her skin crawl. She kept her gaze forward and walked faster, her worn boots clicking against the wooden planks. "Afternoon, ma'am." The voice came from her left, and Catherine turned to see a tall man standing beside a hitching post where a beautiful chestnut horse was tied. He was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy: sturdy canvas pants, a faded blue shirt, a leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded eyes the color of a summer sky. What struck her most was not his appearance, though he was undeniably handsome in a rugged way, but rather the genuine kindness in his expression as he tipped his hat to her. "Good afternoon," Catherine replied, her voice hoarse from lack of use and the dust from the journey. "You just arrive on the stage?" he asked, his tone conversational rather than intrusive. "I am sorry if I am being forward, but we do not get many newcomers, especially ladies traveling alone." Catherine hesitated, then nodded. Something about his manner put her at ease, though she remained cautious. "I am looking for work," she said simply. "I was hoping the general store might know of opportunities." The cowboy's expression grew thoughtful. "Well, old Mr. Henderson who runs the store is a decent sort. He might have some ideas." He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "If you do not mind my asking, what sort of work are you seeking?" "Anything honest," Catherine said, lifting her chin with a pride she did not entirely feel. "I can cook, clean, so keep books if needed. I am educated and I am not afraid of hard work." The cowboy studied her for a moment, and Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks under his scrutiny, but there was nothing disrespectful in his gaze. "Name is James Callahan," he said finally. "I run a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town. Nothing fancy, but I have been doing well enough with cattle and horses that I have been thinking about hiring some help." My partner Red handles most of the outdoor work with me, but the house is frankly a disaster, and I cannot cook anything that does not involve burning it beyond recognition. I have been taking most of my meals at the boarding house in town, which gets expensive. Catherine's heart leaped at the possibility, but caution held her back. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Callahan, but I hope you understand that I must be careful. A woman alone cannot simply go off to a remote ranch with a stranger. James nodded immediately, his expression approving rather than offended. You are absolutely right to be cautious, and I respect that. Tell you what, why do not we go talk to Reverend Matthews at the church? He has known me since I arrived in Silver Creek 3 years ago and can vouch for my character. And if you are still interested after that, we can work out the details. I would offer you the use of the small cabin on my property, separate from the main house, so you would have your own private space. The pay would be $30 a month plus room and board. $30 a month was more than Catherine had dared hope for, enough to start rebuilding her life and saving for a future that did not depend on anyone else. That is very generous, Mr. Callahan. I accept your suggestion about speaking with the Reverend. They walked together to the church, and Catherine found herself stealing glances at the tall cowboy beside her. He moved with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle, and despite her recent experience with betrayal, she found herself wanting to trust him. Perhaps it was desperation, or perhaps it was something in the way he had immediately understood her concerns and addressed them without making her feel foolish. Reverend Matthews was a stout man in his 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He was working in the small garden beside the church and straightened up with a smile when he saw them approaching. James, good to see you. And who is this lovely young lady? This is Miss Catherine Morris, Reverend. She just arrived on the stage looking for work, and I am hoping to hire her to help with the house and cooking at the ranch. She wanted a character reference for me before making any decisions, and I told her you were the man to speak to. The Reverend pulled off his gardening gloves and gestured for them to sit on the bench in the shade of the church. Very wise of you, Miss Morris. A woman cannot be too careful, especially in these parts. But I can tell you honestly that James Callahan is one of the finest young men I have had the pleasure of knowing. He has been a regular at services, has helped numerous folks in this town without asking for anything in return, and runs his ranch with integrity. He and his partner Red are both solid, dependable men. If James is offering you honest work, you can trust him to keep his word. Catherine felt tension she had not realized she was carrying begin to ease from her shoulders. Thank you, Reverend. That means a great deal to hear. They talked for a few more minutes, and Catherine learned that James had come to Montana from Texas, following the cattle drives north until he had saved enough to purchase his own land. He had built his ranch slowly and carefully, and while it was not large, it was prosperous. Red, whose full name was Edward Sullivan, but who had earned his nickname from his shock of red hair, was both James's partner in the ranch and his closest friend, a former soldier who had served in the cavalry before deciding he preferred the freedom of civilian life. As they left the church, James turned to Catherine with a questioning look. So what do you think? Would you like to come see the ranch, meet Red, and see if it might suit you? We can ride out now if you like, and I will bring you back to town before dark so you can stay at the boarding house tonight. If you decide you want the job, I will come fetch you in the morning. Catherine found herself nodding. Yes, I would like that very much. James helped her onto his horse, swinging up behind her with practiced ease. Catherine stiffened at first, unused to being so close to a man who was not her husband, but James maintained a respectful distance as much as was possible on horseback, and his manner remained entirely proper. They rode out of town at an easy pace, and Catherine found herself relaxing as the dusty streets gave way to open country. The Montana landscape was breathtaking in its wild beauty. Rolling grasslands stretched in every direction, dotted with sagebrush and wildflowers that had survived the summer heat. In the distance, Mountains rose like ancient monuments, their peaks still showing traces of snow despite the season. The air smelled clean and fresh, so different from the close, smoky atmosphere of Kansas City. For the first time in weeks, Catherine felt like she could breathe freely. "It is beautiful here," she said softly. "It is," James agreed, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I grew up in Texas and I loved it there, but something about Montana got into my blood. The sky seems bigger here somehow, and the land has not been tamed yet. Makes a man feel like anything is possible." "I hope you are right," Catherine said, surprising herself with her honesty. "I could use a place where new beginnings are possible." James was quiet for a moment before speaking again, his voice gentle. "If you do not mind my saying so, you seem like someone who has had a rough time of it recently." "I do not mean to pry, but if you ever want to talk about it, I am a good listener." Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. It had been so long since anyone had shown her simple kindness without wanting something in return. "My husband left me," she said quietly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. 3 weeks ago, he walked out and took everything we had. Every penny, every bit of savings we had scraped together over 4 years of marriage. He left me with nothing but debts and the clothes on my back. I sold what little jewelry I had, paid what I could to the landlord, and used the last of it to come west. I thought perhaps in a place where women were scarce and workers were needed, I might find a way to survive and start over." She felt James stiffen slightly behind her, and when he spoke, his voice was tight with anger, though she sensed it was not directed at her. "What kind of man does that to his wife, to the woman he promised to honor and protect?" "A coward," Catherine said, surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. "A selfish coward who decided that his dreams were more important than his responsibilities." "I am sorry," James said quietly. "You deserved better than that. Any woman deserves better than that." They rode in silence for a while, and Catherine felt oddly lighter for having spoken the truth aloud to someone who seemed to genuinely care. She had been carrying the shame and anger alone for so long that she had not realized how heavy the burden had become. The ranch appeared as they crested a small rise, and Catherine caught her breath. It was modest but well-kept, with a sturdy wooden house that looked like it had been built with care and attention to detail. There was a barn, a corral with several horses, and what looked like the small cabin James had mentioned, set apart from the main house by perhaps 50 yards. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could see well-tended fences marking the property boundaries. Everything spoke of hard work and pride in ownership. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, and Catherine immediately understood the nickname. Red was perhaps James's age, with a shock of bright auburn hair and a beard to match, broad shoulders, and the kind of solid, dependable look that inspired confidence. He raised a hand in greeting as James brought the horse to a stop. "Red, this is Miss Catherine Morris. I am hoping to convince her to come work for us, cooking and keeping house. Miss Morris, this is my partner and best friend, Red Sullivan." Red approached and tipped his hat with a shy smile. "Pleased to meet you, ma'am. And I hope you do take the job because James here cannot cook worth a damn, begging your pardon for the language. We have been living on burned beans and tough beef for too long." Catherine found herself smiling despite everything. "It is nice to meet you too, Mr. Sullivan." "Just Red, ma'am." "Nobody calls me Mr. Sullivan except my mother, and she is back in Boston." James helped Catherine down from the horse and proceeded to show her around the property. The house was indeed in need of a woman's touch, with dust covering most surfaces and dishes piled in the kitchen, but it was structurally sound and actually quite charming. Someone, probably James, had built beautiful wooden furniture by hand, and the stone fireplace was expertly crafted. The cabin he had mentioned was small but cozy, with a comfortable bed, a chair, a small table, and its own little stove for heat and cooking if she wanted privacy for meals. "We built that cabin thinking we might hire a ranch hand eventually," James explained as they stood in the doorway. "But it would give you your own space. Your own place where you could lock the door and feel safe. Red and I would never bother you unless you invited us or there was some kind of emergency. Catherine walked through the little cabin, running her hand over the smooth wood of the table, imagining what it might be like to have her own space again, to feel secure and independent. "Mr. Callahan, I accept your offer. When would you like me to start?" James's face broke into a genuine smile that transformed his features from merely handsome to truly striking. "Call me James, please, and how about tomorrow morning? I will ride into town at first light and bring you back here. We can get you settled, and you can start whenever you feel ready." They rode back to town as the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. James took Catherine to the boarding house and paid for her room and meals for the night over her protests, insisting that she was already working for him and he took care of his people. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, was a plump, motherly woman who immediately took Catherine under her wing, providing her with a hot bath, a hearty meal, and cheerful conversation that required little response. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in days, Catherine stared at the ceiling and wondered if she was being foolish to trust James Callahan so quickly. But something in her gut told her that he was genuine, that his kindness was real and not some ploy to take advantage of her vulnerability. And even if she was wrong, even if this turned out to be another mistake, at least she was taking action, making choices, trying to build something for herself instead of simply giving up. James arrived at dawn as promised, and they rode back to the ranch through the cool morning air. Catherine spent her first day settling into the cabin, unpacking her few belongings, and then tackling the disaster that was the main house. She cleaned with a vengeance, scrubbing away weeks of bachelor neglect, washing dishes, sweeping floors, and shaking out the rugs. By late afternoon, the house was transformed, smelling of soap and fresh air instead of dust and old cooking grease. For dinner, she prepared a simple meal of fried chicken, biscuits, gravy, and green beans from the surprisingly well-stocked pantry. When she called James and Red in for supper, their faces lit up like children on Christmas morning at the sight of the laden table. "Miss Catherine, this looks like a feast," Red said, pulling out a chair with obvious eagerness. They ate with enthusiasm, both men offering sincere compliments on her cooking that made Catherine flush with pleasure. She had not realized how much she had missed cooking for appreciative people. Thomas had rarely praised her efforts, taking her work for granted as simply what a wife was supposed to do. Over the following weeks, Catherine settled into a routine that brought her more peace than she had known in years. She rose early to prepare breakfast, packed lunches for James and Red to take with them when they worked the far pastures, spent her days cleaning, mending, and managing the household, and prepared hearty dinners that the two men devoured with gratifying appreciation. In return, they treated her with unfailing respect and courtesy, never entering her cabin without invitation, always thanking her for her work, and making her feel valued rather than simply employed. But it was James who captured her attention in ways she had not expected and was not sure she wanted. She found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, noticing the way he moved with unconscious grace, the kindness with which he treated the animals, the patience he showed when teaching a skittish horse to accept a saddle. He had a quiet strength about him that was nothing like Thomas's bluster and empty promises. James spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight because they were backed by action. One evening in early September, Catherine was preparing dinner when a sudden rainstorm blew in from the mountains. She watched from the kitchen window as James and Red raced to get the horses into the barn, both men soaked within minutes. They came into the house dripping and laughing, and Catherine found herself laughing with them at their bedraggled appearance. "You two look like drowned rats," she said, bringing them towels. "Go change into dry clothes before you catch your deaths. Dinner can wait." James caught the towel she tossed him, his eyes meeting hers with an expression that made her breath catch. It was only a moment, gone so quickly she almost thought she had imagined it. But in that brief glance, she saw warmth and admiration and something deeper that made her heart flutter in her chest. After dinner that night, Red announced he was heading into town to play cards with some friends and would probably stay at the boarding house rather than ride back in the dark. Catherine felt a flutter of nervousness at the thought of being alone with James, but she reminded herself that he had never been anything but a perfect gentleman. They sat on the porch together watching the sunset after the storm, the air washed clean and smelling of wet sage. James brought out 2 cups of coffee, handing one to Catherine before settling into the rocking chair beside her. "Can I ask you something personal?" James said after a long, comfortable silence. "You can ask," Catherine replied, her heart beating a little faster. "I may not answer, but you can ask. Your husband, the one who left you, did you love him?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment, considering the question honestly. "I thought I did when we married. He was charming and handsome and full of grand plans for our future. But looking back now, I think I was in love with the idea of him, of the life he promised we would have together. The reality was very different. He was selfish and careless with money and blamed me for all his failures. By the end, I did not love him anymore. I just felt tired and trapped." James nodded slowly. "I have never been married. Came close once back in Texas, but she decided she did not want to marry a man who smelled like cattle and could not promise her a big house in town. Hurt at the time, but looking back, I think she did me a favor. I would have tried to be what she wanted and I would have been miserable." "Why are you asking about my husband?" Catherine asked softly. James turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. "Because I need to know if your heart is still tied to him. If you are still in love with the man who left you." Catherine met his gaze steadily. "No, whatever I felt for Thomas died when he walked out that door with all our money. I am not nursing a broken heart, James. I am angry and hurt that someone I trusted betrayed me so completely, but I do not love him anymore." "Good," James said quietly. "That is good to know." They sat in silence for a while longer, and Catherine wondered what James was thinking, what he had meant by his questions. But she did not push, simply enjoying the peaceful evening and the comfortable presence of the man beside her. As September turned to October, Catherine found herself falling into step with James in ways both large and small. They developed an easy rapport, talking over breakfast about plans for the day, discussing improvements to the ranch, sharing stories from their pasts. James told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about the long cattle drives north, about his dreams of building something lasting in Montana. Catherine shared memories of her childhood in St. Louis, of her father who had been a bookkeeper and had taught her to read and do figures, of her mother who had died when Catherine was only 15, leaving her to raise her 2 younger brothers until they were old enough to strike out on their own. Red watched the growing connection between them with knowing eyes and barely concealed approval. He made excuses to go into town more often, giving them time alone, and Catherine sometimes caught him smiling when he observed James looking at her. One afternoon in late October, Catherine was hanging laundry when she heard a commotion from the direction of the barn. She dropped the sheet she was holding and hurried toward the sound, arriving to find James standing at the corral fence watching a magnificent black stallion race around the enclosure, tossing its head and snorting defiance. "He is beautiful," Catherine breathed, coming to stand beside James. "And mean as a rattlesnake," James replied, but there was admiration in his voice. "Fellow in town owed me money and gave me this horse instead. Says he is too wild to be broken, but I think he has just been mishandled. I am going to see if I can gentle him." Over the following weeks, Catherine watched James work with the stallion whom he had named Midnight. Instead of breaking the horse's spirit through force, James used patience and kindness, spending hours simply being near the animal, talking softly, offering treats, waiting for trust to develop. Catherine saw parallels in the way James treated the frightened, angry horse and the way he had treated her when she first arrived. broken and wary, expecting betrayal around every corner. Slowly, she realized she was falling in love with James Callahan. It crept up on her in quiet moments. The way he smiled when she brought coffee out to him on cold mornings, the care with which he repaired the step to her cabin without being asked, the respect he showed for her opinions when they discussed ranch business. This was nothing like what she had felt for Thomas. This was deeper, steadier, built on genuine admiration and friendship and the kind of bone-deep trust that could not be manufactured or rushed. The first snow fell in early November, dusting the landscape in white and making everything look clean and new. Catherine stood on her cabin porch wrapped in a shawl, watching the flakes fall, when James emerged from the main house and walked toward her. He carried a bundle wrapped in brown paper, and his expression was oddly nervous. "I have something for you," he said, offering her the package. "I went into town yesterday and picked this up. I hope it is not too forward of me." Catherine unwrapped the paper with trembling fingers, and her breath caught when she saw what lay inside. It was a beautiful wool cloak in deep green, lined with soft flannel with a hood and brass clasps. It was the finest piece of clothing she had owned in years, practical and warm but also lovely. "James, this is too much," she protested weakly, even as she ran her fingers over the soft fabric. "Winter gets cold up here," James said simply, "and I noticed your shawl was pretty thin." "I want you to be warm, Catherine." The use of her first name sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. He had been carefully calling her Miss Catherine since she arrived, maintaining proper distance. The intimacy of her given name felt like crossing a threshold. "Thank you," she said softly. "It is beautiful, but James, I should tell you something." "What is that?" Catherine took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "When I came here, I was broken. My husband had left me penniless, and I felt like I had nothing left to offer the world except my ability to work. I was not looking for anything except survival." "And now?" James asked, stepping closer. "Now I realize that being poor in money does not mean being poor in everything else. These past few months, working here, getting to know you and Red, feeling safe and valued and respected, it has made me understand that there are kinds of wealth that have nothing to do with money." James reached out and gently took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "Catherine, I need to be honest with you. I did not hire you just because I needed help with the house and cooking, though I certainly needed that. I hired you because from the moment I saw you step off that stage, looking scared but determined, I felt something shift inside me. And every day since then, I have been falling more in love with you." Catherine's heart was pounding so hard she was sure James must be able to hear it. "When I told you my husband left me penniless," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I meant it. I have nothing to bring to a relationship except myself. I have no money, no property, nothing of material value." James cupped her face in his hands, his blue eyes blazing with intensity. "Then let me make you rich in love," he said fiercely. "Let me give you the kind of wealth that matters, the kind that cannot be stolen or spent or lost. Let me spend every day for the rest of my life showing you what it means to be truly valued and cherished and loved. I am not a rich man, Catherine. This ranch is small, and some years are harder than others. But I can promise you loyalty and respect and love that will never waver, never fail, never abandon you." Tears streamed down Catherine's face as she looked up at this good, honest man who was offering her everything that truly mattered. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, James, I love you too. I did not think I could ever trust a man again, but you have shown me that not all men are like Thomas. You have been patient and kind and good, and I have fallen completely in love with you." James bent his head and kissed her, gentle and reverent, as snow fell around them like a benediction. Catherine wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all her hope and love and trust into that single perfect moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, James kept his arms around her. "Marry me," he said. "Not because you need security or because you work for me, but because we love each other and want to build a life together." Marry me and make this ranch a home, not just a place where I work and sleep." "Yes," Catherine said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 3 weeks later in the small church where Catherine had first asked Reverend Matthews for a character reference. The entire town turned out for the wedding, delighted by the romance and eager to celebrate. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house cried happy tears throughout the ceremony. Red stood up as best man, beaming with pride. And when Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, the congregation erupted in applause. The ranch became a true home after that. Catherine moved her belongings from the small cabin into the main house, into the bedroom she now shared with her husband. They worked together during the days, building the ranch, making plans for the future. And at night they held each other close, grateful for the love they had found in the most unexpected of circumstances. Red continued to work the ranch with James, and eventually built himself a small house on the far edge of the property, joking that newlyweds needed their privacy. He met a widow in town named Margaret, who had 2 young children, and began courting her with James and Catherine's enthusiastic encouragement. The winter passed in a blur of snow and warmth, of learning each other's rhythms and preferences, of building intimacy both physical and emotional. James was patient and tender, so different from Thomas's selfish demands, and Catherine discovered that physical love could be beautiful when it was based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Spring arrived with mud and rain and new calves, and Catherine discovered she was pregnant. James's joy was overwhelming and infectious. He became even more protective and attentive, constantly worrying that she was working too hard, insisting she rest more, bringing her little treats from town. "James, I am pregnant, not made of glass," Catherine laughed one afternoon when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "Women have been having babies forever. I am perfectly capable of doing my normal work." "I know," James said, pulling her into his arms. "But you are my wife, and that is my baby, and I cannot help wanting to wrap you both in cotton and keep you safe from everything." Their son was born in September 1879, exactly 1 year after Catherine had stood on the porch watching James work with Midnight. They named him Samuel, after James's father, and he came into the world with a lusty cry and a shock of dark hair like his daddy. James cried when he held his son for the first time, overcome with love and awe and a fierce determination to be the best father he could possibly be. Catherine recovered quickly from the birth, aided by Mrs. Patterson and Margaret, who both came to help during those first weeks. She marveled at how different her life was now compared to what it had been just a little over a year ago. Then she had been abandoned and penniless, certain her life was over. Now she was surrounded by love with a husband who adored her, a healthy baby, good friends, and a home that felt solid and permanent. Samuel grew quickly, a happy baby who seemed to inherit his father's easy temperament. James was a devoted father, singing to his son, carrying him around the ranch, talking to him constantly about horses and cattle and the land they were building for his future. Red married Margaret in the spring of 1880, and their combined family became a source of joy and support for everyone. Margaret's children, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old William, adopted Red as their father with the easy acceptance of children who recognized genuine love when they saw it. The two families often shared meals and celebrations, and Catherine loved watching the community they were building together. As the years passed, the ranch prospered. James and Red expanded their herd, bought more land, built better fences and structures. Catherine kept the books, managed the household, raised their growing family, and became known throughout the area for her kindness and good sense. She occasionally helped other women in difficult situations, remembering her own desperation and wanting to offer the same kind of hope that James had given her. In 1881, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, who had her mother's delicate features and her father's blue eyes. James was just as besotted with his daughter as he had been with his son, and Catherine sometimes had to laugh at the sight of the tough cowboy being wrapped around the tiny finger of his baby girl. One evening in the summer of 1882, Catherine and James sat on the porch after the children were asleep, watching the sun set over the mountains as they had done so many times before. James held Catherine's hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her skin. "You ever think about him?" James asked quietly. "Your first husband?" Catherine considered the question honestly. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not with regret or longing. Sometimes I wonder what became of him, if he ever found whatever he was looking for when he left. Mostly, though, I think about him as a lesson learned. He taught me what love is not, which made it possible for me to recognize what love is when I found it with you." James raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "He was a fool to leave you, but I cannot help being grateful that he did, because it brought you to me." "Do you remember what you said to me that first day on your porch?" Catherine asked. "When I told you my husband had left me penniless." "I said I would make you rich in love," James replied, smiling at the memory. "You kept that promise," Catherine said softly. "Every single day you have made me rich beyond measure. Not in gold or silver or money in the bank, though we have done well enough in those ways too, but in the things that really matter. In love and respect and partnership, in children and home and community. In knowing that I am valued for who I am, not just for what I can do. In feeling safe and cherished and seen. That is real wealth, James. That is the kind of richness that can never be taken away." James pulled her close, and Catherine rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. She thought about the terrified, broken woman who had stepped off the stage in Silver Creek 4 years ago, certain her life was over, with nothing but pennies in her pocket and shattered dreams in her heart. That woman had been poor indeed, but she had also been brave enough to keep going, to accept help, to trust again, to open her heart to the possibility of love. "Thank you," Catherine whispered. "For what?" James asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "For seeing me when I felt invisible. For offering me hope when I had none. For keeping your promises. For making me rich in all the ways that truly matter. You do not need to thank me for loving you, Catherine. It is the easiest thing I have ever done." They sat together as darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful and lasting from the ashes of disappointment and betrayal. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, secure in the love that surrounded them. Around them, the ranch they had built together stretched out toward the mountains, a testament to hard work and partnership and shared dreams. In 1885, Catherine gave birth to twin boys, Jacob and Matthew, completing their family with chaos and joy in equal measure. The house rang with laughter and noise, and the kind of loving pandemonium that came from having 4 children under the age of 6. James built an addition to the house, creating more bedrooms and a larger kitchen, always thinking ahead to their family's needs. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and numbers like his mother, but also had his father's way with horses. Rose was fearless and adventurous, constantly giving her parents heart palpitations with her climbing and exploring. The twins were mirror images of each other in appearance but opposites in temperament, one quiet and observant, the other boisterous and bold. Red and Margaret added 2 more children to their own growing family, and the ranch became a place of life and love and community. They hired additional hands as the operation grew, and James made sure to treat every employee with the same respect and fairness that had characterized his treatment of Catherine from the beginning. Catherine sometimes thought about the bitter irony of her first marriage. Thomas had been obsessed with money, with getting rich, with finding his fortune, and in his selfish pursuit of those things, he had destroyed everything good in his life. James had never chased wealth for its own sake, but by focusing on doing good work, treating people fairly, and building something of value, he had achieved a prosperity that went far beyond mere financial success. The winter of 1886 was harsh. one of the worst in Montana's history. Cattle died by the thousands across the territory, and many ranchers were ruined. James and Red lost some of their herd, but their careful planning and the shelters they had built saved most of their cattle. It was a difficult time, with everyone working long hours in brutal conditions, but they survived where others did not, and Catherine was proud of her husband's foresight and determination. In the spring of 1887, Catherine stood in the kitchen of their expanded house, preparing breakfast for her family. Through the window, she could see James teaching Samuel how to rope a fence post while Rose watched with eager eyes, begging for her turn. The twins played in the yard with the family dog, their laughter carrying on the morning breeze. She had been in Montana for 9 years now, and she was 45 years old, no longer the desperate young woman who had stepped off the stage with nothing. She looked down at her hands, noting the calluses and the simple gold wedding band James had placed there, and thought about all those hands had done in the years since. They had cooked thousands of meals, cleaned and scrubbed and mended, held babies and soothed tears, worked alongside her husband, written in the ledgers that tracked their prosperity, and reached for James in the darkness with love and desire that had only deepened with time. Her first husband had left her penniless, taking everything she had worked for and saved, treating her like she had no value beyond what money she could help him accumulate. James had found her in that destitute state and had offered her something far more precious than gold. He had offered her love and respect and partnership. He had made her rich in all the ways that truly mattered, and in doing so, had shown her what it meant to be genuinely valued and cherished. The kitchen door opened and James came in, his face lit with the smile he reserved just for her. "Breakfast smells amazing," he said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Not yet," Catherine said, leaning back against him, "but the day is still young." "I love you," James murmured against her ear. "More now than yesterday, less than I will tomorrow. You are my heart, Catherine, my home, my greatest treasure." Catherine turned in his arms and kissed him, tasting coffee and morning and the life they had built together. "And you are mine," she whispered. "My good, honest cowboy who made me rich in love and gave me everything that truly matters." Outside, their children played in the morning sun. Beyond them, the ranch stretched toward the mountains, solid and prosperous, and built on a foundation of love and trust and mutual respect. Inside, Catherine and James held each other close, grateful for every day, every moment, every blessing that had come from the chance meeting between a desperate woman and a cowboy with a kind heart and a generous soul. The years continued to unfold with the usual mixture of joy and challenge, triumph and difficulty. There were hard years when the weather was brutal or cattle prices fell, and there were good years when everything seemed to go right. But through it all, James and Catherine faced everything together, their love deepening and maturing like fine wine, becoming richer and more complex with time. Samuel grew into a young man of intelligence and integrity, eventually going to university to study law, becoming the first in the family to pursue a professional education. Rose married a neighboring rancher's son, a young man James thoroughly vetted and approved of, and started her own family just a few miles away. The twins went into ranching with their father, bringing new energy and ideas to the operation while respecting the traditions James and Red had established. As Catherine aged, her hair turning silver and lines of laughter etching themselves around her eyes and mouth, she sometimes looked back on that terrified woman who had arrived in Silver Creek with nothing and marveled at the journey. She had been poor in money but rich in courage, broken but not destroyed, hurt but still capable of hope. James aged beside her, his dark hair graying, his face weathered by years of sun and wind, but his blue eyes still looked at her with the same love and admiration they had held from the beginning. He had kept his promise every single day of their life together, making her rich in love, showing her what it meant to be truly valued and cherished. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1899, James gave Catherine a beautiful locket containing tiny photographs of their 4 children. She cried as she opened it, overwhelmed by the physical representation of the life they had built together. "My husband left me penniless," Catherine said that evening, echoing the words she had spoken so long ago to a kind cowboy outside a general store in a dusty Montana town. James smiled and pulled her close. "And I made you rich in love," he replied, completing the exchange that had become a touchstone of their relationship. "Richer than you could ever have imagined. Richer than I deserve," Catherine whispered. "No," James said firmly, tilting her chin up to meet his eyes. "Exactly as rich as you deserve. You are worth more than all the gold in these mountains, Catherine Callahan. You always have been." They stood together on the porch of their home, surrounded by the life they had built, the family they had raised, the love that had sustained them through 2 decades of marriage. Around them, the Montana landscape stretched toward the mountains, wild and beautiful and free, a fitting backdrop for a love story that had transformed both their lives. Catherine had arrived in Montana penniless and broken, certain her life was over. But she had found something far more valuable than money in the arms of a cowboy with a generous heart. She had found love and respect and partnership. She had found home and family and purpose. She had found herself again, stronger and wiser and more whole than she had been before. James had taken a woman with nothing and made her rich beyond measure, not through gold or silver, but through the kind of love that transforms and heals and endures. He had kept his promise every single day, showing her what it meant to be truly cherished, and in doing so, had found his own fortune in her love. As the sun set over the mountains one final time in our story, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Catherine and James held each other close, grateful for every moment of the journey that had brought them together. They had built a legacy of love that would continue through their children and grandchildren, a testament to the truth that real wealth is measured not in money, but in the bonds of love and family and community. The Wild West had been their backdrop, Montana their home, and love their greatest treasure. And as they grew old together, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and the love of their family, they knew without doubt that they were the richest people in the territory, not because of what they owned, but because of who they loved and who loved them in return. That was the kind of wealth that truly mattered, the kind that could never be stolen or lost or diminished. That was the promise James had made and kept, the fortune they had built together, the legacy they would leave behind. Their love story became legendary in Silver Creek, told and retold as an example of how love and kindness could transform lives. People spoke of the woman who arrived with nothing and the cowboy who made her rich in all the ways that mattered. They spoke of a partnership built on respect and trust, of a family raised with love and values, of a legacy that extended far beyond money or land. And when James and Catherine finally passed, years later within months of each other, as couples who are deeply bonded sometimes do, their children gathered to remember parents who had shown them what true love looked like. They remembered a mother who had been brave enough to start over, and a father who had seen value where others saw only desperation. They remembered love that endured, promises that were kept, and the kind of wealth that really mattered. The ranch continued through generations, but it was the love story that truly endured, a reminder that sometimes the greatest riches come not from gold in the ground but from love in the heart, and that true wealth is measured not by what we have but by whom we love and how we love them.